A mutual defense pact has been entered into by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. The agreement states that aggression against one will be considered aggression against the other. When questioned on whether this places Saudi Arabia under Pakistan's nuclear umbrella, a senior Saudi official avoided specifics, stating only that the pact covers all defensive and military means deemed necessary. In theory, Pakistani forces could now deploy to Saudi Arabia with missile systems, alongside a joint air defense network tied to satellites and interceptors. On top of the nuclear umbrella that now, by strategic ambiguity, extends over the kingdom, all of this would come. The details, however, remain unclear as the pact has not yet been made public. What is clear is that the talks had been underway for a minimum of 2 years, and the pact comes amid growing anxiety over America's reluctance to restrain Israel, with the Qatar attack serving as the breaking point. The poster child of a non-NATO ally was, in many ways, Saudi Arabia. Its loss of trust in U.S. security guarantees signals a deeper strategic shift, one with profound implications for China, India, and Iran. Now, Riyadh seeks to move on. Therefore, the defense pact with Pakistan is a bid for strategic autonomy, a once-in-a-generation realignment that marks the onset of a new geopolitical reality. After all, alliances are built not on promises, speeches, or shared values, but on the arithmetic of hard power. Interestingly, the defense pact could be just one move in a much larger game. Shortly after its signing, the issue of Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, located just 120 kilometers from Pakistan's border, was raised by Trump. Given that the Saudi-Pakistan pact de facto extends a nuclear umbrella, Washington may now be exploring ways to intercept Pakistani missiles headed west. For such a task, Bagram is geographically well placed. The pattern that is taking shape is difficult to ignore. And this is why today's sponsor, Ground News, is so useful. These shifts are often reduced to sound bites by legacy outlets, while social media merely amplifies outrage. Neither gives you the complete picture. Available as a website and app, Ground News brings together coverage from thousands of sources worldwide and shows them side by side. You can compare how different outlets cover the same story, check their bias, and see which stories are being ignored. For instance, on the story page for the Bagram Air Base, differences in framing can be immediately spotted, and blind spots can be found. The story has been covered by more than 300 sources, but left-leaning outlets have barely touched it. I use Ground News to connect the dots and form my own opinion, and I think you'll find it invaluable, too. Go to ground.news/Caspian or scan the QR code to try it out. The Vantage plan is 40% off when you subscribe through this link, and it directly supports my channel. Thank you, Ground News. The link is below. For decades, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have maintained close military ties. When nuclear tests were carried out by Islamabad in 1998, its economy was on the brink. Against a debt of $32 billion, foreign reserves had fallen to just $400 million. U.S. sanctions pushed Pakistan toward default until Saudi money stepped in. To ease the pressure, Riyadh allowed Islamabad to buy oil on deferred payments under a 3-year plan. When the term ended, much of the debt was quietly forgiven by the Saudis, turning the arrangement into an undeclared bailout. Generous, but certainly not an easy decision. At the time, oil prices had plummeted to around $10 a barrel. So, to aid Pakistan, Saudi Arabia was left with a massive budget deficit and was forced to take loans to cover its own expenses. The bedrock of Saudi-Pakistani relations became that bailout in the time of need. The depth of the bond was later captured by Prince Turk bin Faisal, who called it one of the closest relationships in the world between any two countries. Seen in this light, the defense pact between the two is not a sudden alarmist move. It simply codifies decades of cooperation. More recent, however, is the real turning point. Talks on the military pact were begun by Saudi and Pakistani officials only a few years ago. But the process was accelerated by the Gaza war. For decades, close U.S. partners have been Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE, hosting numerous American bases and relying on Washington to underwrite their security. But in the past 2 years, they have watched uneasily as the U.S. stood by while Israel struck targets in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, and now even Qatar. Even though the Arab monarchies have tense, often hostile relations with Tehran, alarm bells have been set off by Israel's unchecked strikes. The region was rattled most of all by the attack on Doha. It reshaped how the Arab monarchies viewed their own security and America's guarantee of it. For additional context, check out our recent video on the Qatar attack, which compartmentalizes the background into clear parts for easier understanding. Suffice it to say, a major non-NATO ally, especially one mediating between Hamas and Israel, was not expected to be struck by Israel by any of the Arab monarchies. Differently, the Saudis now see U.S. security guarantees. It doesn't carry the same weight as before. Saudi anxieties have been heightened by America's inertia combined with Israel's unrestrained operations. The result of that is the defense pact with Pakistan. Technically, the pact is not a full treaty, but for Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, the distinction may not matter. More importantly, the potential to grow into something bigger is held by the bilateral defense pact. Pakistan's military has long been seen by the Gulf Arab states as a credible nuclear-capable deterrent, and its conduct in the May 2025 skirmish with India only cemented that belief. Now, more nations could either join the existing defense pact or pursue separate bilateral defense pacts of their own. As the most likely contenders, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, Bangladesh, and the UAE stand out. Deep implications for both nations are held by Saudi Arabia's defense pact with Pakistan. But it also comes with a lot of gray area. There is a risk of Islamabad being drawn into Saudi Arabia's rivalries with Iran and Yemen, while a stake in Pakistan's disputes with India and Afghanistan is assumed by Riyadh. Perhaps the most complex of all is the Indian front. Over the past decade, its ties with Riyadh have been steadily strengthened by New Delhi. One of India's largest oil suppliers is Saudi Arabia. Nearly $43 billion is where bilateral trade sits. And in April, his third visit to the kingdom was made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Yet at precisely the moment when Pakistan faces the threat of Indian military action, a mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia has been secured by Islamabad, signed on Modi's birthday, no less. So, new uncertainties are introduced into future India-Pakistan dynamics by the agreement, which will need to be addressed as it is implemented. But for Pakistan, the pact is more than a defense arrangement. Its most pressing vulnerabilities are addressed by it. You see, Islamabad does not need Saudi guarantees. Its military, backed by nuclear deterrence, an indigenous arms industry, and Chinese weapons, can hold its own. What it lacks, however, are two essentials: energy security and financial resilience. Armed conflict is not just about tanks, missiles, and aircraft. It is about supply lines, logistics, and the liquidity needed to keep an economy running under strain. For Pakistan, its ability to sustain a prolonged war has long been capped by external shocks such as sanctions, energy price spikes, or sudden financial cutoffs. India had counted on this vulnerability, hoping to drain Pakistan's resources through drawn-out skirmishes. But now, with Saudi oil and financial backing secured, the cap on Pakistan's endurance has been lifted. Beyond what its own economy could sustain, Pakistan will now be able to expand its arsenal and scale up its arms industry while doing so. To be clear, fully deterring India from striking Pakistan is unlikely to be achieved by the pact. But with support from three key powers, China, Turkey, and now Saudi Arabia, Islamabad is in a good place. For the first time, Chinese weapons can be paired with Saudi oil and money, giving it a warfighting capacity it has never had before. Meanwhile, for Saudi Arabia, the pact is just as valuable. Initially, a defense treaty with the United States had been sought by Saudi lawmakers, along with U.S. cooperation on a civilian nuclear program of its own, but the request was turned down by the White House, which insisted that any deal would first require Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. Tensions escalated after the Hamas attack on October 7, which set off the Gaza war and a wider regional conflict. Increasingly outraged, Riyadh grew by Israel's campaign in Gaza and by the conduct of Netanyahu and his far-right allies. So far as to accuse Israel of committing genocide when Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, making it clear that normalization was off the table unless Netanyahu ends the war and takes steps toward establishing a Palestinian state. At the same time, close ties were kept with the Trump administration by the Saudis. They pledged more than $600 billion in U.S. investments and hosted Trump in Riyadh during his Gulf tour in May. The hope was to nudge the White House toward compromise on the defense treaty. However, the negotiations that followed came to nothing. Saudi officials now acknowledge that a defense treaty with Washington is not going to happen unless they first normalize relations with Israel, something they have made clear they will not do. And so for Saudi Arabia, the pact with Pakistan doubles as a signal to Washington and Tel Aviv that the kingdom can chart its own security. And frankly, it has to. At the intersection of global trade, energy, infrastructure, and regional conflicts sits Saudi Arabia. These are all liabilities that cut to its very survival. But by tying its defense to Pakistan, a nuclear-armed state with experience in both conventional and unconventional warfare, an ally that can act without Washington's oversight is gained by Riyadh. The pact is at once a hedge against an Israeli strike on Saudi soil and an insurance against American unpredictability. Perhaps most importantly, Pakistan's nuclear umbrella is extended over Saudi Arabia by the pact. Even if not spelled out in the agreement, deterrent enough is the strategic ambiguity of Pakistani nukes factoring into Saudi security. And so by signing the defense pact, de facto, a nuclear umbrella has been gained by Saudi Arabia without breaching non-proliferation norms, while the strongest bankroller in the Middle East has been landed by Pakistan without the fiscal strings of the IMF. Nevertheless, some lines remain firmly in place. Saudi Arabia remains and will continue to be primarily dependent on the US for security. For now, this is hedging, not decoupling. I've been your host, Shirin, from Caspian Report. If you approve of what we do, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and mayhaps share the video. In any case, thank you for your time and so hope.